All right, everyone, welcome back to Talkin' Soccer. I am your host, Justin Horniker, coming from not my usual studio. I'm here at my parents' house with the Gold Cup this week and with St. Louis playing this weekend. I'm not fully moved back yet, so for now, I'm in my parents' basement, so if you hear the rain outside or a little more echo than usual, I do apologize, but today it is time to talk about the U.S. women's national team. The official roster dropped last week, and I finally gotten time to really look into it, talk about, what I think of these groups in general and who I think the biggest snubs from this roster would end up being. If you are subscribed to the Talkin' Soccer Substack, I put this article out earlier this week, and I've had some time to kind of just, reinforce my argument in my head and look through some of the stats of the players I think should probably be on this roster. But before we get started, I think, first things first, given the injury issues with this roster, I don't think there are a ton of glaring omissions. I think the players that, were maybe snubbed, you can understand the rationale for why these players weren't picked. Now, if you want to say that Flacco insisted on saying that form matters over everything for the past 2 years and then picked a team largely not based on form, that's a valid criticism. But if you're picking apart the actual, makeup of this roster, I think it's still giving the veteran presence of some of the players they can maybe say were underachieving. I think it still makes a lot of sense. So to start off, let's go into the goalkeeping core. And I think this is an interesting one because I don't have a case against any of these players. You have Alyssa Nair from the Chicago Red Stars, Casey Murphy from the North Carolina Courage, and then you have Aubrey Kingsbury of the Washington Spirit. Kingsbury, of course, being the kind of late addition. Kingsbury has played with the national team before, but recently it's been Adriana Franch. She's been the third goalkeeper. Famously, Adriana Franch has lost that starting job in Kansas City to Cassie Miller, and that's a problem if you are trying to push for the lineup of the World Cup. I kind of raised the alarm a few months back when Cassie Miller was starting to get starts over AD Franch, and since then Cassie Miller has really just stepped up and taken the top job. So that's the front three. A lot of people will say that, the form of Alyssa Nair is why, they aren't necessarily in love with this goalkeeper group, but you have to take that with a grain of salt because the Chicago Red Stars have been bad this year. If you look at XG of every team in the NWSL, you look at how much XG they face, how much XG these goalkeepers have faced. Katie Lund of Racing Louisville has faced 18.85 expected goals. That's the second highest expected goals faced by a goalkeeper in the National Women's Soccer League. Alyssa Nair has faced 33.34. So she has faced almost 15 more expected goals, around the ratio between the ratio between 1 and 2 would be still top 10 in the NWSL as far as expected goals faced. So it makes Alyssa Nair's stats a complete outlier because the team around her is just such a freaking mess that she's just facing so much volume. You can't really analyze that, right? Nothing that she does in that situation where she's peppered with so many shots from so many different opportunities, that's not really going to tell you how she plays with the U.S. national team. We know how she plays with the U.S. national team. She's someone that is comfortable in that system, someone that Vlatko is comfortable with, and it's her starting job to lose in what is probably her final World Cup. I think that Casey Murphy probably has a strong case to start as well. You saw that she put up a clean sheet in the She Believes Cup along with Alyssa Nair, and her last couple starts have been very good for the national team. She's also been very good in the NWSL this year as well. So she's still a little bit younger. So this could be kind of her understudy World Cup with next World Cup, next Olympics being when she takes the reins for sure. But it's a strong goalkeeper group in general. I don't think that, Casey Murphy is definitely head and shoulders above Aubrey Kingsbury, for instance, for who should take up the mantle next. But it's a good goalkeeper group. And even if you have questions around, should someone else had been brought in. I thought Katie Lund also made a pretty strong case for herself. If if there is an injury in this group, that is who I'd want to see. She's been fantastic for racing Louisville this season. Like I said earlier, she's faced the second highest expected goals in the league, and she has the highest, lowest goals to expected goals ratio of minus 3.85, meaning that she's saved 3.85 more goals than is expected to let in this year, and that is one of the best ratios in the league. So she's done a fantastic job in one of the strongest leagues in the world, top to bottom. If you are a good NWSL goalkeeper, you are one of the best goalkeepers in the world, and there are a lot of strong goalkeepers in that league. So goalkeeping-wise, I have no issues. So let's move on to the defense. And this is arguably, I would say, the weakest group in terms of this roster. Now, obviously, injuries play a big role in that, right? You're losing Becky Sauerbrunn, who isn't just the captain of this team, but has been one of the best center backs in the world, and definitely the U.S.'s best center back for over a decade, right? So her injury, her absence looms large over this team. I think that's why Becky went out of her way to kind of announce that she was not going to be on the roster before the roster came out, because she didn't want to be the story. If it's announced that she's not on the roster, she becomes the story. But that's a lot to replace, and now it's Naomi Girma's backline to inherit. The biggest weak link here is the center backs, because Girma is not having a great NWSL season. She hasn't necessarily looked great at national team duties this year as well. Something's going on there that she'll need to figure out. Now you add, I don't know, fullbacks wise, it's a good roster, but I have a lot of issues with the center back depth in general, because if there is an injury there, so you have Girma, you have Alana Cook, you have Emily Sonnet, those are your three center backs. If there's an injury there, you're down to two, and now you have no backup options. It's in unusual territory, because I think it does have a lot of success going forward. I think Naomi Girma's strength is playing the ball, and through Crystal Dunn, Emily Fox, Kelly O'Hara coming in, and she's actually having a fantastic season in the NWSL. So she's not just bringing her veteran presence and her leadership, but she's also playing very good soccer right now. Sofia Huerta, Emily Fox, these are all very good players, but it's a strong group out wide, not necessarily a strong group centrally. I think, if you were to move Crystal Dunn up into the midfield, which we'll talk about in a second, that would have maybe left room for another center back like Casey Kruger, for instance. Casey Kruger has that relationship with Alyssa Nair. She's been in the national team before, and while Chicago has had just a terrible season, Casey Kruger is fourth in the league in goals plus, which is a number given to players, taking all sorts of factors. It's a little more complete of a number than XG. It's goals added. It takes into effect the number of chances that you're interrupting. It takes into effect as much as you can without getting overly analytical about things. So Kruger is fourth in the league in goals added among center backs, and she has been the fourth strongest center back in terms of expected goals against that she's been able to step up and put out. Now, the Red Stars are having a lot of chances come against them, so those numbers are going to be a little bit inflated in that way. But if there is an injury in the defense, I would want to bring Casey Kruger. I think you're in a good spot if you bring her. That's kind of my snub for the defense. But again, I'm not sure if I would change those roster necessarily. I think it's just the case of where injuries put us. I also wonder, if Elizabeth Ball, plays for the Kansas City Current, was their best defender last year, is coming back into form. I wonder if Elizabeth Ball is healthy from the start of the season, if she makes her way onto this roster as well. But again, what ifs, hypotheticals, things we will never ever know. So let's move on to the midfield. Now we're getting to the real meat and potatoes of this roster. It's a very fun midfield. For as much as I think the attacking core is the best attacking core in the world, the midfield has the classics, right? You're going to be led by a Rose Lavelle, a Lindsay Horan, a Julie Ertz midfield three. That's kind of the classic. That's what Vlatko wants to do. Ertz has handled playing time well, as much as she hasn't been, setting the NWSL on fire. You saw with the friendlies against Ireland that if she's in that position, it's like riding a bike. She's going to be able to pick that back up again and do just fine. I'm not too worried about that at all. If anything, I'm maybe a little bit worried about Rose Lavelle's health, but she says that she'll be fine, and I trust her. But even outside of those three, it's a fun squad. You have Ashley Sanchez, Christy Mewis, Andy Sullivan. Christy Mewis hasn't gotten a ton of time in the midfield, hasn't gotten a ton of time with the national team, but Vlatko went out of his way to talk about, if anyone's going to give me 19 minutes a game, I know Christy Mewis will give me the best 19 minutes in the world. Ashley Sanchez is also interesting because the connection that she has with Trinity Rodman, that could really mix up the midfield. Ashley Sanchez can almost play like a really advanced midfielder, almost like a shadow striker, a really advanced attacking midfielder. And she has that connection with Trinity Rodman that's going to be so important as well. So Ashley Sanchez is a very interesting inclusion in that for her to play at her best, it almost requires Vlatko to get out of the usual shape of that 4-3-3. And I think that might even help in some circumstances. And if anything, just gives the U.S. an extra look that they can throw out there. If, say, you're at the end of a knockout game, you're against Germany, you're against Canada, you're against Australia, England, whoever it is, and you need someone to come on to really mix out the way that you're playing, Ashley Sanchez is a great opportunity there. If I were to talk about the biggest snub, to me, that is Crystal Dunn has to be in this midfield group. I know that Vlatko is pretty married to her as a left back, but if you look at how well she's been doing in the NWSL this year, to me, it's not a question, because I think you can look at, if you look at the fullback group, it's a strong fullback group. I think it gets a rap for being thin outside of Crystal Dunn. But if you go back and you look at that group that we just went over, it's Crystal Dunn, Emily Fox, Kelly O'Hara, and Sofia Huerta. And any one of Emily Fox or O'Hara or Huerta could slot in really well. And Emily Fox, I think, has been growing so much over this past year and has shown that she can do Crystal Dunn things back there as well. So I think you could still have a very talented fullback group moving forward and still have Crystal Dunn in the midfield. I think Crystal Dunn, as much as I love Samantha DeMello and I'm happy she's on this lineup, if you were to include Dunn as a midfielder and bring another center back, I think I like that roster a little bit more. But that's not going to happen unless someone gets hurt. So that being said, this is my reason why I think Crystal Dunn is a better midfielder than fullback. She works well in midfield three of Sam Coffey and Christine Sinclair with the Thorns. She is 7th in the league in G+ this season, the highest of any midfielder of anyone that's not an attacking player, and one of only 3 non-attacking players in the top 10 of goals added in the NWSL this season. So if they struggle to provide chances, like we said with Ashley Sanchez, how she can offer a different look, I think Crystal Dunn in the midfield could also be a nice little change that maybe other coaches are surprised by the first time it gets thrown out there, if it gets thrown out there. Okay, that being said, let's move on to the attack. This is both the best group in the world, but also the group with the most snubs. I mean, it's kind of incredible the depth of attacking talent in this U.S. women's roster pool, because you're missing Mal Swanson and Kat Macario from this group as well. It would be a much different conversation if both of them are healthy, but they're not, which means that, the inclusions, really, there wasn't anyone that you're like, okay, this person was a lock for the team and didn't get brought in. Okay, so let's go through this group. Like I said, Kat Macario and Mal Swanson are out with injury. Sophia Smith, who we'll talk about in a second, along with young phenoms Trinity Rodman and Alyssa Thompson. And then you have your old guard of Alex Morgan, Megan Rapinoe, and Lynn Williams. This is Lynn Williams' first World Cup team. She's been phenomenal this year. Megan Rapinoe hasn't been as bad as people make her out to be, but that's also her last World Cup. She is such an icon within U.S. soccer within that group that it's not. I think I take her over someone that's more qualified every day of the week. And then Alex Morgan, who has had a little bit of a down year comparatively, but again, she's proven that she can give you this at the World Cup stage. Plus, she's the U.S.'s most prolific attacker. And at this point, she hasn't done anything to say that she shouldn't be in this roster. So the only reason that it's worth talking about is because Ashley Hatch, Washington Spirit, who has been in the roster before, has been in that lineup before, was left at home. And if you look at the stats behind the scenes, Ashley Hatch could almost win the MVP this year for how well she's been doing. Obviously, she's behind Sophia Smith in attacking numbers. Sophia Smith is just having a unreal season, even better than last year where she won the MVP. Again, it just speaks to the attacking talent across the league. So she only trails Sophia Smith in expected goals. Hatch would give you another out-and-out striker too. Sophia Smith isn't necessarily an out-and-out striker, not necessarily that target player. Ashley Hatch can be. But again, she's been very good for the Washington Spirit. It's good for the Washington Spirit that she was left back for these Challenge Cup games coming up. But I don't know what else she would have had to do to earn a spot. There's, even with the injury, she's been included before. The only thing I can think of is that Vlatko didn't like how the group gelled with her in the roster. But even then, I've never heard anything bad being said about Ashley Hatch. And yeah, it's hard to really come up with a reason of why she isn't in this roster, but she isn't. The other name that's a bit of a stretch in that she's never really been on the radar, but CeCe Kaiser of the Kansas City Current currently is third in the league in expected goals behind Ashley Hatch, behind Sophia Smith, second in goals plus. She has actually edged out Ashley Hatch and again is only behind Sophia Smith in that category. Again, Kaiser is probably a few spots away. If there aren't the injuries, I'm not even talking about her being anywhere close to this lineup, but you can look at, the kind of goals that she scores for KC, which are kind of these chaotic, like gets a leg out there. She once talked about how she has long legs, so she better use them kind of goals. And I think that's something that the U.S. could use in certain situations, that they don't have a ton of just strikers who kind of score those dirty goals. I mean, if you look at how the U.S. have scored really historically, it's a lot of just, real confident play. And if I'm trying to forecast out to the Olympics, I'm trying to forecast out to the next round of World Cups, CeCe Kaiser is 25. She's, grown a lot over the past 2 years. I think that she should be in that next cycle. That's a name to keep on your radar. Okay, those are my snubs, my grades for this World Cup. I still think it's a very good roster. I think that this is maybe the weakest I felt about a U.S. roster going into a World Cup. But if you look at injuries around the world right now, U.S. are not the only squad dealing with high-profile injuries. I mean, just look at England. England is going through a similar thing. I think what I would want to see is a U.S.-England final. I'm not sure if we'll get that far. I think Australia has been good. People are discounting Brazil. And look at how their players have done in the NWSL this year. I think they could go far potentially and surprise some people. But let me know down in the comments below. Are you excited about this World Cup roster? Who do you think is going to win the World Cup? And how far do you think the U.S. women's national team are going to go? Are there any obvious snubs for you in this lineup? Again, let me know down in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't subscribed already. Thank you all so much for watching Talkin' Soccer. Again, I am Justin Horniker. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. And as always, folks, we'll talk real soon.